Welcome to the deep dive. You've sent us a really comprehensive set of materials on Kashmir and, well, the whole India-Pakistan dynamic. It's quite a lot.
It really is. We're looking at history, politics, the economic side, humanitarian issues, even the nuclear angle, which is sobering.
Yeah, and Article 370's revocation, the UN's role over the years. It's all in there.
So our mission really is to sift through all this you've given us,
Mm.
pull out the key threads, and try to make the connections clear.
Exactly, to give you a clearer picture without getting totally lost in the weeds. So where do we start? History seems logical.
Definitely. Your sources rightly frame it, starting with the end of British rule, 1947, partition, the birth of India and Pakistan.
And right in the middle of that, the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. A really complex case.
Incredibly complex. You had that Muslim majority in the Kashmir Valley, but then Jammu was mixed. Ladakh was largely Buddhist. Gilgit Agency, also Muslim majority. So very diverse.
Which made its position during partition extremely difficult.
Absolutely. And this complexity, as the historical sources you shared point out, feeds directly into that first war, 1947, 1948.
Not a simple situation at all.
No. And the war itself didn't really resolve anything definitively. It led to Kashmir being divided.
In the creation of the line of control, the LOC.
All right, LSE,
Yeah.
which is still the de facto border today. And it's worth noting, as some of your sources do, India ended up controlling about two-thirds of the original state after that war.
The UN also got involved quite early. I saw mentions of Security Council resolutions in your materials.
Yes, there were early resolutions calling for a plebiscite, letting the Kashmiri people decide their future.
But they never happened.
No. And this really highlights a recurring theme, doesn't it?
Hmm.
International bodies propose solutions, but national sovereignty claims often get in the way. These resolutions, technically under Chapter 6, just haven't been implemented.
So that initial division kind of set the stage for the political arguments that continue today, especially around self-determination.
It really did. And moving forward, the sources you sent make it clear this isn't just about land. It's political, legal, and deeply human.
Let's get into those dimensions. The political and legal side first, maybe? Article 370 is central there.
Absolutely central. It
Yeah.
granted Jammu and Kashmir that special autonomous status within India. Its own constitution, its own laws on many things, except, like, defense, foreign affairs.
But that was revoked in August 2019.
Right. And a key point your sources emphasize is that this was done without consulting Kashmir's elected political leaders. It basically brought the region under more direct central government control.
And Article 35A was connected to that. What was its role?
Well, Article 35A was enabled by Article 370. It defined who counted as a permanent resident of J&K.
And that came with specific rights.
Yes, significant ones, like the exclusive right for permanent residents to own land, hold state government jobs, get state scholarships. When 370 went, 35A effectively went too, opening things up quite dramatically.
Understandably, revoking these sparked huge debate. The whole idea of self-determination comes up a lot in the sources.
It does, often referencing those early UN resolutions again. Proponents argue they're still legally relevant, maybe even customary international law.
But India sees it differently.
Very differently. India's position, as your sources state, is that self-determination applies to peoples under colonial rule, not parts of an existing sovereign country. That's a fundamental disagreement, a real sticking point.
And these political and legal fights have, well, devastating real-world consequences for people on the ground. The UN Human Rights Council has raised alarms.
Serious alarms.
Hmm.
Reports from the UNHRC and other human rights groups cited in your materials allege significant human rights abuses by Indian security forces.
Often linked to specific laws, right, like AFSPA and the PSA.
Exactly. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act, AFSPA, and the Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act, PSA.
And these give security forces quite broad powers.
It's extremely broad. AFSPA allows forces in disturbed areas to use lethal force, arrest without warrants. The PSA allows for administrative detention, meaning holding people without charge or trial for extended periods.
And criticisms focus on accountability.
Yes, critics argue these laws can lead to abuses with insufficient accountability. Concerns about access to lawyers initially for those detained under PSA, for example. It's all highlighted in your sources.
The use of pellet guns is another really disturbing aspect mentioned.
Yes, several sources detail their use against protesters. The result has been horrific injuries, including many people, unarmed civilians, being blinded. It raises serious questions about proportionality, based on international guidelines.
Your sources also cover the displacement of the Kashmiri Pandits, a very painful history.
Deeply painful. The forced exodus of the Hindu Pandit community from the Kashmir Valley due to rising militancy in the late 80s and early 90s.
The numbers cited seem to vary.
They do. You see different figures from the Indian government, Pandit organizations, news outlets. But whatever the exact number, the impact was catastrophic for that community. A huge demographic shift, a real tragedy. It shows the cost for everyone involved.
And beyond the immediate human toll, the economic implications are massive too, aren't they? Especially considering the risk of a larger war.
Oh, huge. A major India-Pakistan conflict would be economically devastating for both. Even limited fighting could cost billions daily just in military spending.
And the wider economic disruption.
Could run into tens of billions per day, potentially. You see, instability often triggers capital flight, makes currencies fall.
And India imports a lot of oil, right?
Exactly. So a weaker rupee makes oil much more expensive. Plus, regional conflict could spike global oil prices anyway, hitting consumers everywhere.
Kind of like the ripple effects we see from conflicts elsewhere.
Precisely. Look at the economic devastation in Gaza and the West Bank GDP collapse. Massive unemployment. That's a grim reminder. War might briefly bump GDP figures due to spending, but the long-term damage to growth and stability is immense.
And then there's the nuclear dimension hanging over everything.
Which adds, well, an almost unthinkable layer of danger. Both India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. The potential for catastrophe is undeniable.
Your sources mention a case study about the humanitarian impact.
Yes, a study modeling a 100-kiloton airburst over a city like Manchester. The numbers are just staggering.
What kind of numbers are we talking?
Over 81,000 immediate deaths, more than 212,000 injuries just from the blast and heat. Emergency services completely overwhelmed.
In the fallout.
Less widespread from an airburst compared to a ground burst, but the immediate destruction is the key thing here. It's this kind of catastrophic potential that fuels efforts for a global nuclear ban.
Okay, shifting to more recent times. The sources talk about ongoing proxy conflicts and the situation after Article 370's removal.
Right. The insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, ongoing since '89, is often framed as a proxy war. India blames Pakistan for backing militants.
And Pakistan has its own accusations against India.
Yes, regarding the insurgency in its Balochistan province. And historically, both have backed different sides in Afghanistan, too. It's a complex web.
The period right after Article 370 was revoked in 2019 sounds like a major clampdown in Kashmir.
It was. Widespread communication blackouts, internet, phones cut off, heavy security presence, restrictions on movement. Services were restored gradually, but it was a period of intense lockdown and disruption for residents.
And the reaction to the revocation itself wasn't uniform.
Not at all. Your sources mentioned celebrations in Jammu among some displaced Pandits in Ladakh, but also widespread criticism and protests, especially in the valley.
There were also issues with information control.
Yeah, allegations of misinformation spreading online during the blackout, leading to social media accounts being blocked. It was a very tense period.
And more recently, there's talk of the insurgency possibly reviving.
One source you provided suggests that after Pakistan's 2024 elections and the IMF deal, there might be elements looking to ramp up the Kashmir insurgency again, maybe taking advantage of perceived thinner security in Jammu.
And reports of advanced weapons.
Yes, concerning reports of militants in Jammu using things like Steyr AUG rifles, which raises fears about, more sophisticated infiltration, possibly groups like the SSG.
Let's look internationally. How has the world, particularly the UN, viewed this, according to your sources?
Well, as we discussed, the UN Security Council initially treated it more as a political dispute, perhaps not fully grappling with the legal claims, according to some analyses.
And Cold War politics played a role.
It seems so. Declassified documents suggest U.S. and British decisions at the UN were often influenced by their strategic calculations regarding the Soviet Union, sometimes separate from the actual India-Pakistan arguments.
Interesting. And some U.S. officials apparently blamed India back then.
Reportedly, yes. Some felt India resisted UN truce plans because they feared losing a plebiscite. Hindsight is complex, of course.
And within India, views on removing Article 370 were also mixed, even among the opposition.
That's right. While the government pushed it, some prominent Congress leaders actually supported the move, though perhaps disagreeing with how it was done. It shows the issue cuts across symbol party lines within India.
And internationally.
It remains sensitive.
Yeah.
You saw reactions like Bahrain taking action against protests about Kashmir, showing how carefully other nations tread.
Okay, finally, despite all this conflict, your sources do mention attempts at Well, building bridges, confidence building measures.
Yes,
Yeah.
CBMs. Over the years, there have been many attempts. High-level talks, trying to ease visa rules, restarting cricket, which is huge for both countries, reopening bus and train routes.
Showing there's potential for connection.
Absolutely. And it's crucial, as your sources note, to remember the deep cultural and linguistic ties. Shared languages like Punjabi, Kashmiri, Sindhi, even cross-border marriages happen. There's a shared heritage beneath the political conflict.
So wrapping this up, the sources you sent really paint a picture of immense complexity. History, politics, human rights, economics, the nuclear shadow. It's all interwoven.
It truly is. And a core tension that comes through is that clash between claims of sovereignty, the ongoing impact of the Article 370 changes, and this relentless cycle of conflict and sometimes fragile peace efforts.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. In situations this tangled with such deep roots, what realistically can international bodies or outside actors achieve?
And perhaps, what are the broader consequences for all of us when conflicts like this with such high stakes remain unresolved decade after decade? Lots to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.